Hello. Hello, ONA. We're going to get started. Hopefully, once everyone's done having their picture taken, they'll come inside. It's really different. It's difficult to compete with Muppets. I mean, I think we found this out for several years now. All right, so today we're going to talk about diversity, everyone's favorite topic, and the topic that always seems to keep coming up, rearing its head year after year. And we're going to talk about how we can find some strategies to effectively deal with this, how things are changing with new media companies, digital startups, and things like that. And first off, just a quick overview of some of the things that have happened this year, some of the things that have sort of been the impetus for this conversation. I think to begin with, though, for me as somebody who worked for a newspaper for a long time, some of the things that have been carried over from legacy media, one of the longest traditions is the diversity committee, which seems like one of the worst possible ways to try to make your newsroom or your news organization more inclusive. Because as we all know, committees have always worked very well at solving very tough issues. But the other thing that's difficult about doing things in a committee or trying to do things in a very organized manner is that anytime you talk about race or gender, things can be very personal, they can get very heated. And sometimes it's just difficult to talk about. You need to have some sort of understanding between people. Quickly, some of the numbers that sort of help frame the conversation today. The numbers are not great when it comes to diversity in media companies. As you can see, during the 70s and 80s, there were more efforts from this chart specifically for newspapers. There were more efforts to help make newsrooms more diverse, bring in more candidates from different communities. But as you can see, those numbers are starting to level off and drop. At the very same time, these same trends are very well mirrored in technology companies. So a lot of the places that we as journalists now use to distribute our stories and other content, places like Facebook, Twitter, Google, their numbers are very similar. They tend to be predominantly male, predominantly white, and because this is Silicon Valley, well, male and white mostly. At the very same time, the trend continues in television and entertainment. The number of women and minorities who are writing for TV shows is also very, very small. And so overall, what we see with this picture is that the people who are writing the news, the people who are creating the technology that is changing the way we live, and the culture, the television shows that reflect our culture, well, don't reflect our culture, basically. And it just makes you sad. You know, you see these numbers, it's 2014, everybody says we've got a black president, this shouldn't be happening. Well, clearly we're not post-racial just yet. Specifically on this conversation of startups and new media, obviously there was a big discussion earlier this year about whether startups and new media sites are repeating a lot of the same old mistakes as traditional media. And when we talk about disruptors, we tend to talk about a bunch of white men. And so we're repeating some of the same mistakes that we've seen before. Just recently, there was this list in Vanity Fair that was listing a bunch of disruptors in the media business. There was one woman among the entire list. So that just tells you the state of things. What we want to do is we want to I'm sorry, I couldn't resist the Planeteers. They're the perfect model for diversity, right? This is what we want to be. We want to be smiling and happy, multicolored, multiracial, and reflective of society. When we are talking about diversity, we don't want to be seen as militant and angry because we don't need another angry black man or woman in the media right now. And with that, panel, introduce yourselves.
Okay, cool. Hi, my name is Kim. Excuse me if I squint at you. That light is like crazy bright. I just joined First Look Media as a social media reporter. I have experience in public media, and I am a co-founder of WJChat, where we explore web journalism and the growth of web journalism, and we've covered stuff about diversity, and I've written prolifically about diversity, and that's pretty much me.
I'm Macalo Medina. I'm the current president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. I'm also a tech and social media reporter for NBC in Los Angeles.
My name is Danielle Smith. I am the co-founder of Hardcover, which is our own little disruptive, diverse hardcover culture magazine created by diverse teams for diverse audiences. We kickstarted it, look for it in January. I'm most recently a night journalism fellow at Stanford. I just finished a year up there, and before that I've been a lot of places, but I guess most notably as the editor-in-chief of Vibe twice, the editor-in-chief of Billboard, and a bunch of other places in between. Thrilled to be here.
I realize I didn't actually introduce myself in the rush to do all of this. My name's Justin Ellis, and I'm a staff writer at the Neiman Journalism Lab. So to begin with, the reason we're having this conversation is because it seems like these conversations don't happen regularly enough, and the beginning of this is a question that feels like it's stupid, but it needs to be repeated, and that is, why is diversity important for newsrooms?
I'm just going to be very obvious here. So if you look outside in the community, it's not mostly white. There are people who may happen to be gay, may happen to be women, and we need to represent those communities. It's important because there was a recent study that came out that Hispanic and Latino audiences and Black audiences do not trust the media because they don't feel represented. We can't do a good job of doing what we do if we don't represent the audiences that we write for every day. I mean, you can't cover things in a just and fair way if you don't have some form of knowledge in your newsroom of these audiences you're writing about.
I would say, diversity is very much a business. Just before I talk about that, I mean, look around this room. This is probably one of the most diverse audiences at ONA right now, but maybe this is part of the problem. Like, we have this conversation with ourselves all too often, and the folks that should be having this conversation, I don't know if you're all here. Hopefully you're watching. But for me, diversity is important because it is about the business of journalism, right? How many of the largest markets in the country are minority majorities? How many of those news organizations that serve those communities are actually serving them accurately and representing them in their coverage and in their staff? I would argue most don't. So it's important for those companies to reflect those communities because they're going to be their viewers or their users currently or down the line. And if those companies don't come around to them, they're going to find another place to consume their content.
The question is, why is diversity important?
It's the simplest and saddest question of all time.
Wow, I think it's important because we're all equally interesting. I think that's just a very, I'm a culture journalist. I'm not in breaking, I'm not in news. I'm a culture journalist, and I think we are actually all equally interesting. I think that there has been a long time where many magazines and newspapers have purported to, many that I've worked for, have purported to serve what we've called the mainstream. And I just don't think that that's been true. And I think, frankly, it's probably some of the reason that journalism suffers. We all know about the technology piece of it, but I think it's some of the reason that journalism suffers in some of the ways that it does now, is because it has not really been in service to everyone. And I think it's super important to remember that journalism is a profession in which we are in service to the communities that we serve, and we should serve everyone as best we can in order to do that. It's not that we just need to sort of plug in different races or nationalities or subcultures, but we have to actually get to know each other. That's work. And we have to talk to each other, and that's work. Work isn't fun. At the same time, I absolutely do think it can be done. I've seen it done, and I have high hopes that it will be done.
So one of the big issues when we talk about diversity and when we talk about hiring overall is the networks that you have. And it seems like repeatedly it's this question of who you know. How do journalists of color, female journalists, how do they expand their networks in a way that can cross over with the people who are making the hiring decisions in either startup companies or in traditional media?
Well, I guess I can tell my story of how I got to First Look. I was probably, I think openly, critical of First Look for being pretty white. And I'm pretty sure I tweeted that at least once. And I was having a conversation about, as I was looking for a job, is it wrong for me to look at a company and see the makeup of their senior management and say, this is not I do not have a place here. Like, they're all white dudes, and I'm not, and maybe I shouldn't join that company. And somebody, I don't remember who, but rightfully on Twitter said that might be a mistake on your part. You know, maybe you can change that. And my response to that was, I hate that is my burden, to go into a newsroom and be like, okay, I'm the diverse person you hired, I'm gonna help you with the diversity. And it is a burden, but it is something that we're going to have to shoulder for a little bit. I am pretty pushy, and I have inserted myself in a lot of different places. I have walked up and talked to people who I don't know about, maybe there's a job, or maybe I'll like want to meet you, or maybe we can work out something later. I think it's a matter of as much of the management that needs to hire coming to us and finding us and putting right effort into finding diverse hires, but also us going to them and being like, you should hire one of us. If you're not gonna hire me, I know a guy, I know somebody else. I'm gonna email you a list of people right now. There's plenty of places for me to send somebody if I'm not the right fit, and I'm more than happy to do so.
I feel that the question is one that we started asking 30 years ago. And the big problem, I think, is not always the corporations or the media companies not allowing us to get in, or not creating some procedures for us to work our way in. Sometimes I think there's some blame on us. I think for people of color, for diverse journalists who have been in high levels of management, there is almost an obligation on them to make sure that younger folks were brought up to the ranks. And I think over the course of 30 years, maybe that hasn't happened effectively. And I think we really have to look at ourselves as we, those of us that are in middle management or in higher managements, to really create mechanisms within our own networks to make sure that happens.
The network part of it is hard. I think it's hard for those of us who are of color or women or minorities in some other sense. This is when you say, is there a real good or snappy answer? And then it's like, am I supposed to lean forward more? Am I supposed to lean back more? Am I supposed to dress up, dress down? What am I supposed to do? I think you have to extend a hand. I think, I told you that I was going to be the kumbaya person on this panel from the beginning. It's very interesting when you get these emails that say, hey, we'd like to talk to you about a position that we have available, and you think to yourself, oh, well, that sounds cool, or it doesn't. And most of the time we do respond with, thanks for thinking of me. I'll get some names to you, and then it falls in the cracks. I think an effort has to, just a larger effort has to be made. But I also think on the part of the more white journalists, and particularly I think white male journalists, I think you have to reach out a hand also. Those gentlemen have to reach out a hand also. And it's a scary process when you don't have friends outside of your circle that are Black or Latin or Asian or gay or any of the subcultures that we could think of that aren't really so sub anymore. But I think you guys kind of really should try. I don't know a better way to say it. And I think, to your point also, it's good because it's good, but it's good for your business also. There are people out there that are massively underserved journalistically, and you're doing both yourself and them a disservice by not really reaching out to those communities and serving them with the same kind of journalistic fervor that we serve the white audiences.
Can I add something?
Sure.
I do think, companies and those in management, there needs to be some skin in the game for them, right? They need to step up and say, okay, we can't find these middle managers who are Latino or African American or what have you. How do we do that? Let me give you an example of my work, NBC4. When I started there, I was one of 3 Latinos on the air in Los Angeles, which is 54% Latino. So there was a problem there, but my management saw that about 3 years ago. It was a new management in the general manager and the news director, and they really worked toward diversifying the newsroom, not just Latinos, but also African Americans and women, Asians as well, just across the board, not just on air, but also in management and also in our digital staff as well. And today we are close to 70% diverse on the air. We're close to 65% diverse in our digital team, and that doesn't happen unless somebody steps up and says, we need to do something and get something done. So it takes people, whether you're ethnic or not, or whether you're among those diverse groups or not, to say, we got to better serve our communities, let's figure out a way how.
One thing that I constantly think about is that it seems like this is an issue that you can villainize people, but in some ways it's not villainous, because it almost seems lazy sometimes. In that I mean, an organization ends up hiring from people that they know from in their circles and in their networks. And so how do you make this an everyday thing? How do you push managers, editors to make this something that they're considering on a daily basis, and not, as we often see, when there's a crisis and all of a sudden they're getting interviewed and they're saying, we believe in diversity. To me, it reminds me of someone who goes to their favorite restaurant on a weekly basis instead of checking out the new Jamaican place in their neighborhood. How do we push people to do this, get this to consider that on a daily basis?
I think you speak up. I mean, you have to speak up every day in that newsroom, whether the stories are about diversity or not, whether the coverage is about diversity or the decision-making processes are about diversity or not. You have to speak up and say, why aren't those voices in our newsroom? How can we get those voices in our newsroom? And I'll tell you, it's tough and frightening all at the same time, because you want to keep your job, right? You want to make sure that you're not pissing anybody off, but you also, I think, you're obligated to say something, and you're obligated to fight for what you believe is right in that community and covering that community effectively. And for me, that's speaking up in that newsroom. It's either having a lunch with your boss and going over numbers or going over ways you can better diversify your staff, or it's having a lunch with the guy across the street who might be your competitor and saying, hey, you should talk to your boss and get more people of color in your newsroom.
I mean, on coverage, I have no problem walking up to somebody. When I was working at a public radio station, I multiple times walked up to producers on shows and was like, you had this segment on this morning, just so you know, that kind of came off sort of offensive, and people are a little angry, and it's okay, you can do better next time, but I want you to be aware about that, and we should talk about this, and we should talk about why that happened. Why, when you covered Chinese New Year, you decided to go out and have dim sum and talk about how weird chicken feet are. Like, that's not okay. That was not an okay decision. And I want to fix that. I want to help you fix that. If it's like, I don't want to be the person you run all the Asian stories by, but if you're questioning a story, maybe you should talk to some people. And on hiring, like, I have this personal policy of everywhere I go, I become a recruiter, whether my company asks for me to become a recruiter or not. And I just keep this internal list of people that I know that I've met at conferences or that are friends, and I'm like, I'm gonna get them hired. I'm gonna work with them someday, and I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait until there's a position, and I'm gonna storm into that managing editor's office with their resume, and be like, here's this amazing person. They are diverse, they are awesome, and you should hire them, and here's their number, and they know you're calling them. And then they can't say no. How do they say we couldn't find a diverse person if you give them somebody on a platter?
Yeah, I think also there's a little bit of the George Costanza opposites thing also that people should consider when they're hiring. They should consider it when they're assigning stories also. I think there's one thing to be said for looking into a particular office or a newsroom and seeing different hues of people and different religions of people and et cetera, but it's something else also to say the Asian reporter that here's a story that has nothing to do with being Asian. Hi to the black critic on staff that always goes to the gospel and R&B shows. Hey, Nirvana.
Can you cover the Kwanzaa festival
Yes.
for us?
Like, come on, folks. Let's just go the opposite way sometime. Like, just try to imagine that person doing something completely different than you imagine them doing. And I've seen it happen sometimes, and the surprises, the happy surprises, 9 times out of 10, that come from just saying, hey, let the black critic write about rock. Let the country critic write about hip hop. It starts conversations. Maybe everything doesn't go so smoothly as it always does in the newsroom, but man, for morale and for the readership, you will find yourself in an extra place. And I say this also to say that there are layers and different ways of thinking about diversity. We always talk about how plugging people in isn't the only way, and that's just another way to try to not be at the Chinese restaurant saying how weird the food tastes.
Well, Kim, you bring up the good point, because it seems like this is always something that happens, again, when there is something that has gone horribly, horribly wrong, whether it's an angry black woman or whether it's anytime a story comes out and 2 days later editors have to say, we completely misjudged this one. There was obviously the situation that happened with Grantland. But the thing I wonder about that is, how do people on staff, minorities on staff, avoid ending up being like the last resort from keeping your company from being like the drudge siren the next day? You know, how do they keep you from being the internet's focus of rage for 24 hours? That seems unfair. How do you combat that if you are in a company?
It's not, I don't want it to be it should not be our responsibility to be the gate, the gate to minorities, or the gate to women, right? You shouldn't, like, just because I am an Asian woman, like, you should not, please do not run all the Asian stories by me. That's really weird. And I don't know very much about Thai culture. I can tell you all about Vietnamese culture, but I think if you start the conversation, I mean, if something goes wrong in your newsroom, which inevitably it will, right? And you walk up and you see, like, this didn't go over so well, or like, there's some angry tweets about this thing. It's not about that story. It's not about the way we did that story. It's about what we do going forward. So if you approach somebody and you're like, this didn't go so well. Poynter's pissed off, and there's some madness going on. You can postmortem it all you want. You can blame somebody in the newsroom all you want. You know, like this guy didn't know very much about the culture. Whoever. It's not about blame. It's about, so what are you going to do to make sure that never, ever, ever happens again? And not a diversity committee, but you legitimately sit down with the top editors, the reporter, and like, so how do we talk about this? How do we learn about this? And not be so ignorant next time. And whether it's, okay, so we didn't cover this community very well, maybe we need to spend more time there. Or maybe we need to bring in somebody from, you know, every major culture in our town and have them talk to our staff just about like how they perceive the coverage in your newsroom.
I think Kim's right. I mean, I think it's important to really come up with those ideas that really push the conversation forward, but it's really the obligation, I really think, of managers in that newsroom to say, what's wrong here? What part of our culture in our staff do we have to change so this doesn't happen again? And that for me, that means
We're getting blasted right now? Is that Queen? What's going on?
It sounds like Queen. For me, that is making sure that they are hiring people of color and women in their management staff that are able to really put up red flags when they're looking at coverage from the get-go. And it shouldn't be a reactionary thing. It should be something they are looking forward to throughout their process.
I think that it's always going to happen again. So I think the idea that we can do something to keep it from never happening again, I don't think we can look at it that way. I think you have to talk to people, and you have to have a variety of different kinds of people in decision-making roles at different levels of the company. And you have to create a space, a culture in the office wherein people feel comfortable to talk about things that are uncomfortable. And as someone who teaches also, You have to create, and we talk about people's work, right? In the MFA program, you talk about people's work, and I always say, let's be slow to offense in this moment, people. Let's try to be slow to offense and talk this out. What is our strategy? Are we going to look defensive and ridiculous? Or are we going to own up to this and say we were wrong? This is difficult. I don't want to generalize men, but it's difficult for men, I think, to be on Front Street, as we say in my old neighborhood, having to say, I did not do this correctly. I really should have some more people of color and women in the room when I make these kind of decisions. And I also think it's very underestimated how much that means to the communities to hear that in a sincere and meaningful way. It means a great deal.
I will say this, just look at the numbers. I mean, half of the country's, more than half are women, right? Latinos account for 54 million, and that number is growing. Asian Americans are triple in size almost every 5 years. So it is a business decision more than anything, and these companies need to understand that, because their consumer, their user, their reader, their viewer is us. And if they're not serving us, they're going to lose those people, because those people will find another place.
But wait, it's not a numbers game, right? Like, you don't want to hire, like, okay, so there's like 30% of African Americans in my community, so I need to hire 3 more, so they would make that 30% of the newsroom. It's not a numbers game. I mean, you don't want to hire token people, right? But you want to hire people that are good. And I was talking to somebody that was in a hiring position, and he was talking about interns, and he said, you know, if I get 2 intern applications and they're relatively the same, and one is a white male and one is a woman, I'm gonna pick the woman. And I'm not sure if that is the right decision or not. I'm not judging that either way, but that is one way to go about it, right? To pull in more, but not necessarily, if the guy was better, then maybe he would have hired the guy, but these 2 were equal. And that's something to really think about. Like, I really don't like it when newsrooms are like, we're gonna hire more Latinos because there are lots of Latinos in Southern California, so we're just gonna hire them. As many as we can get, it doesn't matter. Every role we're gonna hire a Latino, regardless if there's someone that's more qualified. And honestly, sometimes the white guy is more qualified than me. And I'm okay with that. And that just pushes me to want to be better. And I don't wanna be hired because I'm a minority. I wanna be hired because I'm good. So that makes the onus on me as much as it is on them to come find me for something that's great. But I need to be as good or better.
But how many of you have been told there's just not a lot of them out there, right? And
we looked, we tried,
right,
we
we
couldn't
looked,
find
we
anything.
tried, we couldn't find anything. And there might be some truth to that in some parts and whatever the job might be, but I think it's important that these news organizations really take a proactive effort and create a pathway so these people of color who are journalists or who want to be managers have a way to get in the system and become part of their network so they can now pick from that pool. Because if they are hiring people who they know, they're only going to hire who they know, and that's not people of color. So it's important for them to create those mechanisms for us to go through that and be in that whole network of theirs.
As a person who's in a hiring position, has been in a hiring position many times, it's tough. It's tough whether you're at a mainstream organization, it's tough whether you're at an affinity publication. You have to put the time in. You have to call people, you have to call affinity organizations, you have to call clubs, you have to call that one Asian girl that you knew as an undergrad that was in the same major as you have to call your cousin who married like that black guy and no one in the family understands it, but he seems cool, so let me call him. Maybe he knows somebody. Like, you have to put the work in, regardless of your color in the hiring position. You have to put your work in. There's just no escaping that. There's just no escaping the extra work that you have to put in. These pathways have been narrowed or non-existent for people of color and women since journalism has been invented. So the work has to be done. It just has to be done. And the thing is, again, you will find yourself happily surprised. I guarantee it.
I'm going to drop a question, and I don't know if the NFL is necessarily a place that we should take tips from when it comes to management. However, they have something called the Rooney Rule, which says that whenever there's a head coach opening, that teams have to interview candidates of color, minority candidates. Obviously, there is no sort of governing body for all journalism institutions that can mandate that, but do companies need something that says you need to bring in X number of minorities or make a full effort to bring in minorities when hiring?
I'm going to say yes. And here's why. Because we're at a point where media companies are about to face one of the biggest truths in their existence when they have these huge minority audiences that they don't represent in their management, they don't represent in their staff. And if nothing is done quickly, that they will never catch up. And so people of color, and they already are, going to other places for content. And if news media legacy organizations want to keep those people as users, as customers, then they have to make sure that those people that are in management and certainly are in some of their staff represent those communities. So yeah, I think that needs to be done.
As I said, I don't like quotas. I really don't like them.
I thought everybody loved quotas.
They're the best thing ever. No, but I understand that they're necessary right now. I'm really hoping in 5 years we can have this conversation and that won't be a question. That it will just be easier. But it's not an excuse. It's not an excuse to say, like, I have to find like 3 more Latinos. You should be able to find them. I'm sorry. You should be able to find them. This room is pretty diverse, and I'm pretty sure there's at least one person you know that does not look like you if you were a white male hiring, you know. And it's not even just their job. Like, they can come ask their staff. I always get really mad if I work a place and they're looking for diverse candidates, but they never ask me. And I'm like, I could have pointed you to 20 places, or 20 people that could have pointed you to 20 people, that could have pointed you to 20 people. But you didn't ask the people that you have. And that makes me want to leave. Like, if you don't care enough about growing that and growing that staff enough to ask me, but you were going to say, we looked for some Latino guys, but we didn't like know any. And we asked this other manager we knew in like Minneapolis, and like he said he didn't know anybody. So we tried. We asked around. Like, you asked dudes that look like you.
We should say that some of our best friends are white dudes. It's okay.
I don't know about that.
I grew up in Minnesota. It's fine. I can say that. So we talked a lot about hiring, but this is also important, the issue of retention. You bring people on. How do you keep them there? Because at the same time, this seems like something that if you keep people, they can also help you bring in a more diverse staff. How do you retain people once you keep them, once you get them there, I should say?
Oh man, all right, fine.
You don't,
I'm
apparently.
gonna be
All right,
the
next
angry
question.
person. I'm gonna be the angry person. I've very rarely been in a hiring position, but I can say, like, this is what you can do to keep me as an employee. Like, this is what I wish people have done to keep me. Maybe you should talk to me, number one, like on a regular basis, and be like, sorry. It sounds horrible, but
Do people just ignore you in
I
the
just want to say
office?
that
But, like,
I'm agreeing with her in every way, shape, and form for the last like decades of my career. Absolutely.
yeah, and not just like, hi, how are you, but like, talk to me. What are my career goals? What do I want to do? Can this newsroom be a part of it? Like, one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever had told to me was when I told a manager of mine in a review, I was like, I really want to be an editor someday, and not a lot of reporter types want to be editors like right away. And I was like, I really like the idea of management. I really like mentoring people. I like supporting people. And he just looked at me and he was like, I'm not leaving anytime soon, and neither is the other managing editor, so you can't have our jobs. I'm like, I didn't say I want your job right now, man. I'm like 28. I'm not ready for that, but I want your job someday. I wish he would have told me, you want my job someday. Okay, here's what you can do. We're gonna put you in this fellowship class. We're gonna get you some training. We're gonna give you some small projects to train. None of that happened. And that makes, why would you want to stay at a place that doesn't want you to achieve your career goals? Like, it is as easy as if you are a boss, or even like if you are like manage interns, like even that, just talking to people as human beings. You know, what do you want out of life? How can I help you with that? Can I email introduce you to somebody that might be able to solve a problem of yours?
I think those are all great things to do as well, and become mentors of folks in your newsroom. I mean, I come from TV side, right? So TV has a layer of this aesthetic. You know, you have to look away a certain way for some people to consider you to be a main anchor of a show, or you know, host a particular show. You know, I'm a brown kid with a wide nose and and I'm kind of round on my face, so sometimes that doesn't look like most anchors to people, right? And if your managers don't understand that, and don't understand that your community looks like that, that becomes an issue. So I think retaining folks, at least on air, for broadcast journalists, is a lot about that. How do you grow the understanding of, you know, the diversity of how people look and how they how they're perceived on the air?
How to retain people? I mean, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, I think is the basic thing. But I guess in terms of me being an African American woman, just be interested in the things that I'm interested in. Sometimes, at least, I don't know. These things are difficult. How to retain me, or let me see how I try to retain people. I try to give them room to be creative, even if their job isn't that creative to begin with. I try to give them assignments that are unexpected. I try to push them so that they grow in their jobs. I have told many an assistant, you can't work for me longer than for 2 years, because I don't want anyone working for me that wants to be an assistant for longer than 2 years. And this is no disrespect to the people who are fine executive assistants for 30 or 40 years. God bless those people. I just am looking for a different type of person in that job. I try to be actually interested in you, whether you are black or white or Asian or Latin. I try to learn something from you. I tell people from the outset, I am going to say something wrong to you that offends you. About your food, your culture, your shoes, your religion, I'm going to be wrong. I have a good heart. I am apologizing in advance, and I will apologize in the moment. But I need to learn about what's going on with you and your folks. And I think that's important, and I have been told that it makes people at least feel valued.
We're going to open it up to questions in just a little bit. The other thing I think we probably should talk about, and this is obviously the issue of how jobs are promoted and how jobs are marketed, where job ads appear, how they're worded. Those are things that I wonder if they can be barriers to getting a more diverse staff. I was thinking about this recently because there was a great job listing that Mallory Ortberg at the Toast had. It had a great line that wasn't, you see this in most of them where it's, you know, we are an equal opportunity employer. She had it hers, you do not have to live in New York. No one ever has to live in New York. Applicants who are queer and or trans and or of color and or awesome are particularly encouraged to apply. So what role do the way ads are written, the recommendations that, I mean, the requirements that are involved, and then also where they're placed? I mean, do these need to be not on the typical job sites? Do they need to be done more or less through places like Twitter? What role did that play?
So Comcast has these great resource groups within our company. For, you know, they're called Unidos for the Hispanic group, women's group. Everyone has these groups, the out group. And they play amazing roles at really networking with each other via social media to get jobs out within the company. And it's, you know, it varies because Comcast is such a big and complex company. There's various different platforms, so not everyone is qualified for it. But everybody who are part of these groups know these jobs. And then within their own networks, with NAHJ, we put out job postings almost every day on social media, and we send out stuff via email as well. So I think those networks are great ways to get the postings out there.
I think also, when I see the job listing and it says minorities and such are encouraged to apply, I've read that so many times, it's lost meaning for me. I don't know if other people feel that way. When I'm looking for new people, and this is my own personal thing, I still trust in the alternative news weeklies of the United States of America. It's where I started my career, and I feel like in many cases, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, they were strapped before journalism became strapped. And there are a lot of people there who are alternative, actually, and people are being grown there and actually groomed in weird ways. And there's just a lot of people. There are a lot of minorities there. There are a lot of people who are very active in other subcultures, people of different gender IDs, people of different religions at these alternative news weeklies. And I don't mean that we should all go and grab everybody away from the alternative news weeklies, because they need who they have as well. But I think it is an area that goes overlooked in terms of places from which to recruit.
My former colleague of mine, Mandy Jenkins, wrote a really good post about job listings, and she said, it is really unfair when you post your job listing on just your career site. And I took that, I manage a very loosely, not always updated jobs page using Rebel Mouse, and I will only take jobs that are listed on company job sites, because I don't think it's cool that these jobs are lost on the Taleo, whatever that horrible thing situation is that everyone has to apply for, and then you get lost in this pile. And they tweet the jobs out once on a Saturday at 9 p.m. And they're like, yeah, we tweeted it out, so that's enough. You have to post it everywhere. You have to post it on JJobs. You have to reach out to NAHJ. You have to reach out to AAJ, NABJ, and then email. Really good people I know have emailed everybody, basically spammed their whole email folder of I have this amazing job. Please tell everybody you know. And there are a lot of listservs out there. There's a tech lady listserv called Tech Lady Mafia that I'm on, and they curate jobs. We send out jobs to each other all the time, and they're journalism jobs, policy jobs, all sorts of jobs. And you get people that apply that are not necessarily traditional journalists then. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes it brings somebody in from the outside that maybe has a journalism degree but ended up in working for an environmental nonprofit for a few years, but would be a great environment reporter. So you have to do the work, as Danielle said.
I was going to say also that the idea of listservs, I think, is something that is really not talked about enough. I think that there's so much power in these listservs that no one even discusses, and how they're forwarded. I think it's important for there to be listings or notices or people shouting out jobs in these listservs, but I think what's even more important is inviting people to the listserv and trying to get whoever is running the listserv to put on some new people. These things are very powerful. Sometimes people will give you an interview just because you heard about the job from a particular listserv, because they like that you're on that particular listserv. So I think it's just super important that these communities are talked about more and more as these power centers in terms of recruitment.
When you were talking about the job listing, this reminds me of KPCC, Kim's old boss. They did a really intriguing thing with their newsroom 2 or 3 years ago, right? They did this massive project where they diversified a newsroom that was largely white, and the results have been amazing in terms of audience numbers. But they put out a posting that asked for a Latino anchor for a major show, and they got some flack for it. But what they were really trying to do was understand that they had a changing, evolving market that needed to serve Latinos better, and they knew that they had potential audience members or listeners in the Latino market that could come over and build their audience. And so they really worked hard on that, and they put out a posting that said that. They went to NAHJ, they went to random people all across the country and looked for people that would fit this job posting, and they finally found someone. But in the process as well, they also found tons of staff that didn't come from traditional public radio, and they created a staff that has been amazing. That show has doubled its numbers, not just in Latinos, but in all numbers of listeners. And that, I just think that is a prime example of what a news organization can do to really diversify its staff and profit from it, because they're doing great.
All right. I think we've got people lined up. I can't see because there's a spotlight coming right at my face.
There's definitely people.
But just introduce yourself and,
Mark
please be
Ina-
gentle to us.
No, Mark Hinojosa with Detroit News. I'd like to ask a two-part question. One, how many hiring managers are in the room right now? Right? Okay, so the rest of us are all people who are trying to get jobs. What advice do you have for young reporters of color, women, diverse backgrounds, to break into that group, to enter with these people? Not what the recruiters have to look for, but how do these young people connect with that group?
I teach at USC, and this is what I tell my students every semester. I'm like, you better go out and talk to everybody. Like, if you are looking for a job here, whether on the radar, off the radar, student or not, go talk to everybody. Every single conversation you have at this conference, at a journalism meetup, whatever it is a future job interview. I met Andy Carvin, my now boss, like 5 years ago, and we met at an O&A. I never thought I would work for him. He was like, worked at NPR, he was being muckety-muck, and I never thought I would get there. But it became something. It became a relationship. We knew each other, and when he was looking for somebody, he came to me. So everybody, even if there's somebody that's at your level, right? Somebody that you are graduating with, they maybe might get hiring power at a small paper or a small news organization, and they can help you out. Like, it's not an aged, like, looking for older people. Like, talk to everybody. Put yourself in front of everybody.
I would also say that it's the same rule applies for everything in journalism, and it's hustle. When you are a student nowadays, there are so many opportunities for you to write and to create your own presence online. That's obviously not easy, and it's not easy to break through in a way where you can get noticed. But at the same time, just like in any sport, if you take the reps, after a while people will notice, or at least you'll be able to have things to point people to. I think that's probably one of the most valuable things you can do. And just echoing what Kim said is definitely trying to get in front of people and getting just below the level of stalker, like that's where you want to be.
I was going to say send thank you notes times infinity. Don't misspell anything in your thank you notes. Don't misspell anything in your thank you notes, and that's just real talk. But the other thing is, when you feel yourself being discouraged, and you will, you have to call folks before you decide to, God forbid, leave the profession. And that's, call people and say, I am discouraged. Call people and say, I don't know what I'm doing, I need help. How am I presenting myself? Am I presenting myself in the wrong way? This is what I said in the interview. Does that sound crazy? Because I'm the one that will tell you, yes, that probably sounded crazy. I know because I've said crazy things in interviews myself in my 20s and 30s, and probably have gone on to say those things in my 40s. But you really need that feedback. I think you need that thing of everything is going to be all right. Everything is going to be all right. It does get very discouraging. And I think we should acknowledge that. It gets very discouraging. Talk to people who are in the profession and let them bring you back.
I agree. Build your networks. I mean, that's why O&A is great here. That's why if you're a member of NABJ or NAHJ or AHJ or any of the other groups, those are great places to build your networks. These people have been through what you've been through. They can give you some great advice.
Hi, I'm Bené Wilson. I'm an ONA board member. I am also chair of the association's diversity committee. I'm an NAHJ and NABJ member.
She's queen of aviation, by the way, as well.
Yeah, an aviation queen. Emma, could you please stand up for a second? And I think Doug Mitchell is in here too. We have a project that we relaunched in August called Diversified Journalism with Me. Please just go ahead and Google it while I'm talking. We have created a database with some really great qualified people that anybody can search. If you're looking for someone or if you're actually looking for a job, we want people to join this database, and we want employers and managers and hiring managers to look at this database as a real resource. And what the panelists said about reaching out to different networks, we're all out there. We're all out to help, and I'm going to embarrass one more person. Steve Buttry, please stand up. This is a man who understands what it takes to have a diverse newsroom. So see him as a resource too. Thank you very much.
Legit, that thing's pretty amazing.
And we're not just saying that because you can see our faces on there. Next question.
Ron Gomez on Twitter. I know a couple of people up on stage. I guess the guy who went before me stole my two questions, so I'm going to do a different question. I didn't really hear much about mentorship and mentoring. I come from the school of thought that you hire the best person, may the best person win. And I think it really does come down to, training and mentoring younger journalists to be the best at what they do. I want to hear everyone's ideas on Twitter. on how you would foster mentorship?
Actually, this is something that's really important to me right now. So I just became president of NAHJ about 2 months ago, and for me, that was one of the biggest voids that we've had in our organization, and one we're going to really attack, because mentorship is hugely important in growth, right? I mean, we have a little bit less than 600 members of our organization that are college seniors or college graduates or brand new journalists, and they are just getting into the field, and if they don't have a mentor that helps guide them through, they may never get to the positions that we're talking about, those hiring positions or those executive positions, and it's important to do that. So we're actually working on this process now to really institutionalize mentorships within NAHJ to make sure that our members can team up with people and make sure they guide them throughout their career. And I think that's important for newsrooms to do as well. That when we were talking about retention, I think that's one of the biggest things they can do, is pair you up with somebody that you want to be eventually, and that would help you get to where you need to be.
And there's mentorship of like at an equal level. When Danielle was talking about call somebody, I was thinking about how many calls I've made over the past few months. Like I have a panic list, I call it, and it's like 3 or 4 people, of which they definitely know who they are. I think at least one of them is in this room, and I call them with my journalism existential crises, and some of them are my age, some of them are older, some of them are younger, and I just call them like, I do not know what I'm doing. Maybe I'm just going to go in PR. I'm just going to give all this up. This was a horrible decision. I'm just going to go live in a cave. And they walk me off the edge of the cliff. You need that. There's a concept. Robert Hernandez has a concept of horizontal loyalty. We are like web people, and there's only so many generations of us. It's pretty compact compared to all of journalism. So mentorship is not necessarily somebody that is younger than you, though it definitely can and should be, right? Mentorship is also like finding somebody else in your newsroom that you can give something to. So if I've mentored older men who wanted to learn how to blog, and they mentored me in how to deal with bosses. So that everybody can be a mentor in something, and you should be. You should find somebody else you can give to and take a little from.
Yeah, there's a term that some people use, and maybe it sounds a little too TED Talk-ish, but it's your personal board of directors. I know, I'm sorry. But it's a good term, because it's having a group of people that you trust who can mentor you and who you can check in with on a regular basis when you are having these crises of job and personality and just about anything. The other thing I will say, though, and this was something that came up in the Lady Leader Lightning Talks, have to be careful not to say that too fast. But when you have mentor and mentee relationships, you have to think about what both sides are trying to accomplish. So as someone who is mentoring, what is it that you want to do? What do you want to instill in this person? And for the person who wants to be mentored, what is it that you're trying to get out of it as well? And this goes back to sort of the hustle that we were talking about earlier. Overall, I think more people just need to be open to the ways that they can help in large and small ways. At the lab, I get emails from people all the time, from a lot of journalism students who just have questions, and being able to simply reply in an immediate manner and be honest with people can go a very long way.
I'm just going to say, too, that everybody's swamped, obviously. I think something that's gone a little bit out of style that should be brought back, and it's something I try to do as often as I can, is a little thing known as the informational interview. People tweet me all the time and say, well, let's not act like all the time, but when they tweet me and they say, can I take you to coffee, or we should go to coffee, even if I schedule it 2 months out and just put it on the schedule for a Tuesday morning or whatever days I'm doing informationals at that particular time, this matters. And frankly, it is also helpful to me. I get to know new people. I'm not saying every one of those informationals is amazing, though. A lot of them, frankly, are. And I think even if you can't stay in a person's life over the years, or you can have an impact in a very short amount of time, especially, if you are open to sharing your expertise and such. So I'm thumbs up on the informationals.
Hi, my name is Kristen Hare, and I'm a reporter with the Poynter Institute. Can you guys each maybe talk about 1 or 2 news organizations that have gotten the value of diversity, both in their coverage and in their hiring?
Well, there's one that I've read a little bit about. Bloomberg News actually has this interesting program. I don't know if it's an official program, but they have a woman who sort of specifically, she writes about issues of women in leadership, but she also works on ways of bringing more women into the editing and writing pipelines for the company. And, you know, doing that in informal ways while you're not creating something like the women leader beat can be very effective. I think another place that is doing this really well and probably doesn't get enough credit is BuzzFeed. They have a really interesting philosophy that both Ben Smith and Shani Hilton have talked about, where diversity for them is when you have enough people of whatever background in your office that no one person has to sort of carry the flag for their ethnicity, for their gender, for their sexual preference. And so that helps them, number one, have a diverse staff, but it also, you really see that shine when people do personal reporting and it doesn't come off as some sort of tokenism that can kind of, you know, make the writer feel weird and can also make the organization look a little weird.
I was going to mention BuzzFeed as well. I think they're
No,
doing
he
great
totally
work.
took mine.
Sorry, guys.
I would also mention KPCC
You took
in
my
Los
other one.
Angeles. I mean, I really take a really good look at the work they've done over the last 2 years, and you know what they have done. I think has been amazing.
I mean, since you both took mine, they have tried really, really, really hard to do, and I'm not saying they got everything right, by no means. They've probably heard from me on things they haven't gotten right, but I think they put forth a good faith effort, and you have to give any news organization that tries really hard to hire more diverse people than they have in the past, to change the ratios of their staff to something that reflects the community better. And that effort, no matter how many stumbling blocks there are, is important.
I would agree with the ones that have been mentioned, but I would also, again, go back to, say, for example, the Alternative News Weekly in Jackson, Mississippi. The editor there, and I'm so sad that I can't think of her name right this second, but she's gone out of her way to sort of just change what that paper is, what it means to the community, what their site is doing for the community of Jackson, Mississippi, which has been, the history of race relations in that city, and she's taken that on. But then I would also have to credit, even though they're having their issues at this moment, particularly ESPN. I think that ESPN has gone out of their way to create a staff, and they're not there yet, but I think that they are working hard to create a staff that reflects the teams and the culture that they cover, and the people that come to their site and read their magazines and et cetera. So I would have to shout ESPN out also.
Yeah, just to echo that really quickly, I think you see it in a lot of smaller sites, places like I mentioned the Toast before and the Hairpin, where it's sort of similar to BuzzFeed in ways like they do these things very quietly, they don't sort of trumpet it, they just do it. And so, I mean, that's a very interesting model, and I think all those sites are worth checking out.
Allison Prang. I'm in my last semester at Mizzou and looking for a job. But my question, with journalism kind of having still a bit of a pay-to-play mentality with unpaid internships or internships for credit, and in really expensive places like New York and DC, do you think that's hindered these more diverse group of journalists coming and breaking into these circles that you guys are talking about? And if so, how can we kind of break out of that as an industry?
That is an excellent question, and I also went to Mizzou, so Mizzou Mafia, we'll have a little meeting afterwards.
I want to give a quick shout out to NBC Comcast. They've recently just offered paid internships, which was the first time they've done that ever. And now that allows us to really reach out to a lot of journalists, students of color, but also students who come from, backgrounds where they couldn't afford to do a free internship for a summer. And so we benefit from them because they can now come from like a University of California campus and be able to work in our newsroom and really give us a perspective of the neighborhood they come from, opposed from a private school that normally we would get when the internships were free.
Yeah, the internship thing is just, speaking as someone who had to resign from her internship after 8 weeks and this is 117 years ago, but I did in fact have to do it because I could not afford to do a free internship. And I said, who are these magical people that come in and drop off stories? And someone told me they were freelancers, and I said, and they get money for that? well, consider me resigning and becoming a magical freelancer at this moment. For hardcover, our project, when we hit our number at Kickstarter, we said one of our stretch goals was if we raise a certain amount more, I think it was another $30,000, that we would do these fellowships, these virtual fellowships, where we put people through an application process. We're paying them a $1,000 stipend. We have fellowships in content leadership, social, writing and research, and design. 2 of those positions are filled. I say this to say that if hardcover can do it on a budget of way less than $100,000, I feel like companies should just pay. I am a proponent of companies paying for internships. Pay for it. Just pay for it. Pay for it.
Yeah, y'all should pay your interns. That's silly. But I would also say if you're looking to get out of the New York, DC, very expensive mafia, look at fellowships. Look at alternative kinds of internships, right? So look at fellowships you can get as a young journalist. Look at things like crowdsourcing, right? Beacon Reader is a wonderful place where you can crowdsource a whole project, and you can crowdsource it to pay yourself for 3 weeks, 12 months, and it doesn't matter who you are as long as you can raise the money, right? And they help you along the way. I would look at doing things that aren't necessarily traditional media internships, at the New York Times or wherever does or does not pay.
I'm sorry, let me add on to this. We do have 3 interns, though, that we're not paying, and I want to shout them out because they're amazing.
We've just got a couple of minutes left, and I know we've got a couple of questions, but just real quickly, I think we're going to probably see there be less and less paid internships. When media companies are getting sued by interns and former interns, that's usually a good impetus for media companies to stop doing something when someone sues them. But secondly, on this question of doing fellowships and other things that will pay you, that's absolutely the route to go. That's tricky, though, because there's always the riddle of you need clips to get something, and the only way to get clips is to write, and you should probably get paid to do that. So there's a lot of interesting different things you can look at now. I think it was Medium announced the other day that they're doing this weird fellowship thing where they're going to give somebody basically $10,000 and some expenses to go do a reporting project. So there's opportunities like that out there as well.
Thank you. Karen Turner, I'm a professor at Temple University in Philadelphia. And actually, I just have a quick comment for you and for everyone in this room. I want to add to the strategy that you were talking about in terms of increasing diversity in the newsroom. And I want to encourage everyone to go back to your journalism programs. And now that you're alums, think about the diversity or lack thereof on the faculties, because you're talking about people in the newsroom having these sensitivities, and I think that it really can start in the journalism newsrooms, the schools. And I encourage you to go back and have a voice and talk about that the faculties be as diverse as we're talking about in the newsrooms. Absolutely. Thank you.
I agree completely.
Amen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Frederick Lowe of the North Star News in Chicago. We're an online newspaper for black men. I got 2 questions. We're talking about the changing demographics as a reason to hire Hispanics, blacks, and Asians, but a lot of organizations, news organizations, how do you know they want to attract that audience? Their advertisers may not want that audience coming into their stores or buying into their stores. Also, I wanted to look at the complications of hiring someone. Is not a one-person decision. You go through a series of people, and one person may decide, I don't want to hire this person. I just want to get a comment on those 2 things.
I think if you're looking at companies that are mass media companies, I think it's incumbent upon them to want to hire people of color and a diverse staff, because that's the communities they cover. I think as you categorize down different journalism or media groups, and those obviously become different issues, and you really have to look at their audience as well. But I think in the end, if you just look at numbers in general, large markets across the country, it's predominantly going to be minority majority, and those are just going to be the users. Period. It's no longer a let's check a box. These are these are the community. This is the community, and you have to really, if you want those people to be your customers, you have to make sure that people in those newsrooms reflect them.
You are absolutely crazy if you're a media company and you're worried about advertising dollars and writing more for diverse audiences, because the spending power of minorities and women is astronomical. Astronomical. Do some research. It is like through the roof. There's so much more money in advertising and catering just to niche audiences than there is to catering to general audiences. I would not want to work for a place that doesn't think that.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall right now it's just very brutal math about how you make money in this business, and any place that you can get it, you will pursue it. I think if companies are willing to experiment and make very strategic plans for things like sponsored content, then they should also probably look into ways that they can target communities of color and women. And as everyone's already said here, if you look at all of the trends for the ways that people are consuming news and information and what platforms, it's people of color and it's women, and advertisers are going to want that. And I think that is all of our time today. Thank you all so much for being here. Let's have a round of applause for the panel. And we'll see you all at the reception. We can talk about diversity over, some wine or something.